Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, one of my viewers sent me a video with somebody claiming to be a son of a farmer and talking about how they are paying farmers not to grow food and saying that if they do grow food, there won't be any governmental subsidies. And there's news about China, too, that there was two random links that I got from two different people that have a lot to do with each other. So let's start here with Biden's Biden's climate change strategy looks to pay farmers to curb carbon footprint. So this is about global warming. They want these farmers to put cover crops down. Biden vows to pay farmers to plant cover crops and put land in conservation. And so this is 4 million acres of land, quite substantial amount of food that you can grow on 4 acres of land. Biden must pay farmers to store more carbon. Substantial amount of acreage of land that is being placed in conservation, right? Where they put in cover crops and they don't use any type of machinery on it, at least in terms of harvesting, and they just let the cover crop grow, which will emit oxygen, and they're not producing any carbon. So that's their official story. The problem is that there are food crises going on right now. Globally, and even in America, restaurants are hiking prices because of labor shortages, higher wages, and rising costs of staple foods. One owner said he's paying 50% more for ribs than normal and double for cooking oil. So this was, very recent. This was posted 2 hours ago, right? Like this is just, fresh news. Food security and COVID-19. Of course, there was problems just getting food and shipping food, all these things that happened because of COVID. But they were already predicting this. You guys remember I covered this in 2019. The UN came out with a report saying there was going to be global food shortages and famine in 2020, even before they allegedly knew about COVID-19. So they already knew about this, right? 155 million people face acute food insecurity in 2020. Conflict, the key driver. So they're talking about it being from wars. But there's also other issues in terms of the amount of food production. So on one hand, you have a higher rate of children starving. There was speculation that losing 25,000 to hunger every day. So there's 25,000 people, mostly kids, starving to death every day. That was going to go up to 50,000. And I haven't been able to find that being validated. But we do know that there's more starvation right now, global starvation. So on the one hand, you have global starvation, local food prices, even American food prices skyrocketing. And America is a big producer of food. Our massive amount of fresh water and also great farmland. America has just abundant farmland. It's one of our few exports. And in a time when food production is down and people are starving, starvation is up globally, why would you want to pay farmers not to grow food, right? Like this is something they always do, but they're doing it even more. On top of that, it says this statistic shows that total farmland area in the United States from 2000 to 2020. In 2014, farms in the United States occupied a total area of 900 million acres, 913 million acres. By 2020, this amount decreased to 896 million acres. So that's a substantial amount of acres. We're talking about 21 million acres. 20 million 1 acres of farmland is no longer farmland going back from 2014. So in the past 7 years, our farmland has decreased, and now Biden has taken another 4 million acres out of production in a time when there's global starvation, right? So here are some of the other statistics. 7 million people died of hunger in 2020. Global hunger crisis hits 5-year high in 2020 as 155 million people face severe food insecurity, new UN report says. And so we know that there is a higher rate of starvation and there is issues with food. And what people don't know is that we're only one bad year away from global famine. Like one failed crop, corn would probably be the big one. Corn is in so many things. They use corn in, like so many different processed foods. And it's fed to livestock and animal populations and things like this. And so one failed corn crop, like just 1 year, we don't have a lot of storage. We don't have food in storage. And so it just takes a bad year, and it could be in different places around the globe, and there would be massive starvation. Also, energy, like energy prices skyrocket, and people can't afford to grow food. Farmers are going to lose money. I mean, most farmers are losing money. And I talked about this years ago. One of my neighbors in the second attempt at a homestead was talking about his father-in-law, who I used to drive by his farm, and he had a lot of Holstein cattle Holstein cows that he would milk. And the amount of money that he was getting for milk hadn't gone up since 1974 or something, like crazy like that. But his, expenses, his operating costs, has skyrocketed over that period of time, and he was operating at a loss. His cows grazed, right? They weren't factory farms. His cows grazed, and even with that, there was, high costs. Most farmers operate at a loss, but they get governmental subsidies, right? If you see these big machines that take a lot of fuel, and some of these machines cost like $1 million. Some of these, some of the farm equipment, the tractors and things that they use, and they have all these specified machines that are probably breaking down quite a bit, and just all of the things that are involved in farming, that most farmers operate on a loss, right? In terms of, depends on what they grow and things, but some things are more profitable, corn and things like this. But more importantly, the idea that in just one bad year, we could have global famine where maybe 1 billion people died, something crazy like that. That would be hard to recover from because there would be, these deficits. And Biden is choosing not to grow food because of carbon emissions. And there's so many other ways to cut carbon emissions that farming isn't, the biggest one. And this also probably means cattle farms as well. So you're going to have skyrocketing costs for meat production and things. And so, this is where we are right now in terms of food production. Restaurants have to shut down due to pandemic-related food shortages, and they can't get employees. And they had all the losses from the shutdown. So you have all these restaurants, like 1 out of 6 or something, the number of restaurants that had to close due to COVID. Global food shortages warning fulfilling 300-year-old prophecy about the end of the world. So then there's this. China allows 3 children in major policy shift. They now have a 3-child policy in China. So think about this. One of my viewers sent me this link, like it came in at the same time as the link that was sent for the Biden, Biden paying farmers not to grow food. And so think about how these things relate, right? You have China, who has always wanted to decrease their population. They used to have a 1-child policy for families. Then it went up to 2 children, which I wasn't aware of. And now it's up to 3 because their birth rates are plummeting. China is not having kids. They're just not producing children. And it could be because of environmental factors. I mean, not just a social level. It's not about governmental policies and social plans. It's about birth rates. U.S. birth rates, steeper decline in 2020. Fertility rates are way down. They've declined by 4%, which is a major amount of decline in birth rates. So in 2020, birth rates in America plummeted, and this can be the end of your culture. I've talked about this before. U.S. birth rates see steeper decline in 2020. On a world level, it went down by 1.1%. And again, people were, at home. You would think that because of the lockdown, it would increase birth rates. People being locked, couples being locked at home together, it would increase birth rates. You can see that it's going down, right? The birth rates are going down. and older people are dying. Fertility rate, jaw-dropping global crash, and children being born. Falling fertility rates means that every country could be shrinking population by the end of the century. And in 23 nations, including Spain and Japan, are expected to see their populations halve by the year 2100, right? So this is, basically 80 years away. Countries will also age dramatically with as many people turning 80 as there are being born. And so we know that older people are dying at a record or high rate now because of COVID and, other reasons. And so you have older people dying off. And so in America, it's the boomer generation. If they die off, and then you have a two-pointed, problem here in terms of human population. Again, we've been overpopulated and population has been growing forever. And I'll talk about this more in a second. But you see, if your population growth rate, your birth rate goes below 2.1, then the size of your population starts to fall. When your birth rate goes down for many years under 2, then your country is basically finished. You can't recover from it, right? Like it's just your population's going to shrink. It's going to be overwhelmed by either some foreign country invading or immigration or something. But most of the European countries are done. They've had such low birth rates for years. And even America, there's a lot of immigrant birth rates. There's a lot of immigrant births. But in terms of American population, it's also below 2.1. And now it's even gotten worse in 2020. So let's sift through the data here and come up with a more reasonable assessment of what's going on here. Because there's always the official story. And since we deal with politicians that are liars and cheaters, and we deal with a media that is full of liars and deceivers, and then governmental liars, just across the board, human beings are liars and working an angle, and you can't trust them to tell the truth, right? There's fact-checking sites everywhere for individual people, like they've got all these fact-checking sites for individual people and to Trump for some extent, counting Trump lies in gumballs like CNN. But in reality, we know that all people lie, that people are liars in general, and governments and institutions are the biggest liars, and their lies have the biggest effects on us all. And so it's safe to assume that the official story is at least partially not true. And so if Biden is paying farmers, and this is something, there's a program, governmental program to pay farmers not to grow food, and Biden is increasing the numbers of farmers that are being paid not to grow food. But we do know that food production and food costs and food security is all down, right? We don't have as much food security. And, with the trauma of 2020, all the things that happened with COVID and all the global things and all this stuff that happened with that, right? And also we're talking about workers in the agricultural farming field. Because if you pay farmers to grow a cover crop, then they don't need as many staff. They don't need as many people working on their farm because they're not, harvesting any crops. And so this is a whole thing, distribution. There's lots of food jobs related to the farming world that when you decrease the amount of farmland being used, and the amount of farm goods, there's going to be significant farm-related job loss, right? So that's another factor. But in a time where we know that starvation is up globally and even locally, and food prices are skyrocketing, right? Like one of the ways you make food prices skyrocket is you lessen the supply. And there's all these countries where people are starving, and we could export this food, right? It's one of the things that we export here in America. America is mostly, we have a deficit in terms of import to export. America imports a lot of things, but we don't export very many things. And so instead of using government tax dollars to have farmers not grow food, you could use some of that money to subsidize these farmers and then also subsidize some of this food and get it out globally and help these starving children. Like if you're a humane person and you're a person who is, into children not starving, like we know JoJo's into children, like 6-year-old girls that look like 19-year-old girls to him. But, is he into helping kids around the globe not starve? But the other piece to this is there's huge population growth for many, many years that the powers that be don't want to tell you about in terms of, they don't want to, come out and say they want to reduce the population, but we know they do because they have programs to reduce the population. And again, I always get people say, no, that it's the overpopulation myth. Human population or any population isn't based in the global amount of, land that's available and dividing it by the population. Like that's what people do. And they're like, wow, there's all this land available for people. There's not really overpopulation. But you could say that about every species, right? Like we could, put a bunch of gazelles in like Utah or whatever it is, right? Like we could put kangaroos in Mexico. Like we got room for kangaroos in Mexico. Like it's just, there's no, that's not how populations work. When there's overpopulation, it's always local. When there's overpopulations of a species, and we have these cities that human beings weren't designed to live in, and it causes psychological issues. And human beings don't do well when they live in city environments, nor do any other creature except for creatures that are designed to live in colonies, insects mostly, right? But most creatures need, land, and they need space, and they need, whatever. Like they need, to be outdoors. You see the difference for people who are living in a rural environment in terms of psychological health and physical health as opposed to people who are, confined into these concrete jungles where there's a massive overpopulation. And so this is something that people in the truth community don't want to deal with, that the population has been growing for the past 400 or 500 years. If you go to a place like India and you drive through one of these cities, it's really an experience I think everyone should have, where there's 20-some million people. There's cities in India that are 40 million people. And if you just drive through from one side to the other, and it takes like 8 or 9 hours, like crazy stuff because of the poor traffic conditions. And you drive by some of the impoverished areas where people are living in huts, or some of these, you go to some of the poor places where there's just lots of people. China, I hear, is even worse. And it's depressing, has an effect on you. Just driving through, I was like, oh my God, it's a horrible experience. So the people who run the world, the UN has a population award, and Bill Gates has won it, and there's been all these, leaders that have won it for people who have found ways to help reduce the human population. And clearly, by lessening the food production, they are either saying there is going to be less demand, which right now we know isn't the case. We know that food prices are skyrocketing. That's in part because the dollar has lost value. That's a big part of it here in America. But we also know there's a supply problem where restaurants aren't able to get food they need. It's not just demand, it's not just price. It's also there's too much demand out there. And there wasn't enough food in 2020. We saw shortages for the first time in America. And America is always going to get the food first because of the value of our currency, because the dollar is, it's the world reserve currency. It has a higher value in so many places. Europe is going to be fed as well because of the value of their currencies. But when those currencies tumble, which is going to happen to America, there's going to be food shortages here, even though we have lots of farms. And then with rising fuel costs, it's going to cost farmers too much money to produce food. Where there's going to be a growing demand for food and people are going to be starving, but the farmers themselves, because of rising fuel costs and expenses, aren't going to be able to make money farming, and the government's going to be, broke. We're in so much debt right now that there'll be food shortages here in America. And then that's when, the shit will really hit the fan, right? Like when you see people starving in America and you go to grocery stores and they're empty, there's not enough food, people hit the panic button. And so, Biden is helping that nightmare scenario to develop based in paying farmers, again, printing money that we don't have to pay farmers not to grow food when there's definitely food shortages. All these agencies, the UN, the World Economic Forum, have all predicted that there's going to be massive famine in the future. So, like, we know that this is coming because they're saying is coming, and then they're making policies that will make this happen. And then with China saying their birth rates are down so much that they're finally allowing people to have more than 2 children. I mean, families to have more. They're encouraging families to have more than 2 children, hoping to get their birth rates up in a very overpopulated country. And then you have all these other countries where the birth rates are down. And we know the death rates are going to go up because they are administering things right now that are going to not only, there's going to be sterilization of the younger generation, right? I mean, things are going on right now, the things I'm talking about. Things are going on right now. Some of it has to do with Wi-Fi and, electromagnetic poisoning. And I've talked about this before. The sperm count in men has gone down by 50% since, 1974? And it's at a point where if it goes down any lower, the average sperm count, men won't be able to father children. We saw this in the movie Children of Men. And women are becoming more infertile. We know that as well. And, they are now, and there are things going on right now that is going to decrease the fertility rate in women. And so, you have this on both sides. Men fertility rates are dropping, and so are women. And then you have the older generations that are going to die off at a higher rate. And that's a recipe to reduce the population and also global food shortages. So my, I don't want to say position because it makes it sound like my opinion matters. It makes it sound like I have some influence, which I don't, right? And really nobody does, even the people who control the system. That's one of the problems with the truth community. They give too much power and credit to the people that I call the controllers, who themselves are, spinning out of control. They want to control things they can. And now, their system, the system that they've created, this debt-based economic system, and all of it, right, is out of control. And people are doing horribly. And that's one of the more telltale signs of overpopulation, that you have a very weak species, right? There's so much weakness in our species, psychological weakness, physical weakness, spiritual weakness, and just, going in the wrong direction. Human beings are doing really, really poorly in terms of what we are, what we are as, our full potential. Every species, you have a range of what you are, what your potential is, right? The high level potential of human beings, which we really haven't even flirted with, which, maybe a few spiritually advanced human beings have reached the highest level of evolution, but there's still so much more that we could do, get out of what we have, right? Making the most of our potential. And most of us, are severely underfunctioning. For what we could be, we're on the very low level of what we actually are. The expression of our potential and talents and things, our abilities and all of it. And mostly to do with spirituality and our relationship to God, which is where the biggest amount of evolution, the highest level of evolution in terms of, you're only going to get so smart. You're only going to be able to jump so high, right, in terms of physical evolution. There's been a lot of movement. There's, records being broken on the athletic field all the time. New, ways that people are able to express themselves physically. There's a lot of energy into that, right? Where, in terms of sports and things. But our physical potential is very finite. Even our mental potential is very finite. But our spiritual potential is infinite because God's infinite, right? This is why I talk about the heartfulness meditation all the time. That your heart can expand to encompass the whole universe. You can have a universal heart, and through that, your understanding of God, not your knowing of God, because mentally you can never know God. Your mind can never, expand to such an extent that you would understand all the ways of God on a knowledge-based, mental-based approach to understanding God mentally. But in terms of, your ability to feel God and understand, through love, your heart can expand to encompass the whole universe. So in terms of your heart's development, your potential is infinite. Your subtle bodies. So there is a lot of room for growth in the human experience, but right now human beings are really under functioning. So something's got to give. And a big part of this is the change in the cities, getting rid of the cities, city life. Like that's definitely bringing human beings in the wrong direction. And when that happens, there needs to be population reduction. The only reason we can have as many people as we do is because of cities. There's this idea that everyone in the world could live on an acre of land in Texas. And so there can't be world population, overpopulation. People aren't realizing what it takes in terms of resources, harvesting resources of all kinds throughout the globe to keep 8 billion people going. And we're still not able to do it. It's not able to feed everybody. People aren't able to live in houses. There isn't enough goods out there for everybody. Of course, you have all these people hoarding it, but that's a part of our system. That's why we have cities. Because it's I talked about the economy extensively yesterday. It's a greed-based economy. And so if you remove that and people live in agrarian type of situations, there was like 100 million Native Americans in America before, the white people, the Europeans came here. Now there's 300 million. And the native peoples were, they were good stewards of the land. Like their footprint was very small. And so in terms of 100 million people being in America, yeah, that makes total sense, right? That can be done if they're living the way that the Native Americans lived in agrarian-based communities, in a tribal-based situation. Like that can be done. And all across the globe that could be done, where people aren't absorbing too much of the resources and aren't, crapping out all kinds of toxic stuff in terms of their lifestyle. But, that's neither here nor there. People are doing poorly, and there's going to be population reduction. Whether the controllers do it or whether it happens naturally, it just will happen. It happens to every species, and it's beyond our control at this point. See, there's no answer. There's no good answer to what do we do to turn this thing around and save our civilization. There's no solution to that problem. There's no way to salvage our civilization. If they said to me, "Hey, Paul, we'll give you whatever, $1 billion, $100 billion, $1 trillion, and you'll be in charge of the world and fix it," I'd be like, "No way!" Like, I would never take that job. Like, not that that job exists, but you can't, fix this problem because it's a system that was broken at the very onset, right? It was a scam. A debt-based economy is a scam, and it tilted everything towards materialism and away from our relationship with God and nature. I talked about two wings of the bird. A bird needs two wings to fly from the heartfulness system, a spiritual wing and a material wing. And so you have to have balance where you're connected to God, but you're also living your material life. And our system is just materiality and consumption and gluttony. And now we have the effects of that, right? So there's the population effects, the world population effects, and then there's all the things that go with it, right? In terms of the, technological advancements and the internet that's caused all kinds of problems, not only in terms of psychologically and socially, but in terms of our health, like electricity and the Wi-Fi and the 5G has all affected us negatively, right? I mean, we're losing sight of the fact that they rolled out 5G, which are, millimeter waves. 4G was microwaves. 5G is millimeter waves that are even smaller, more powerful, and going to have, a more negative effect. If you think about microwaves cooking, you can nuke something and cook the crap out of it. You can, eviscerate it with with microwaves. Well, think of what would happen if you had millimeter waves that are even more powerful and, smaller waves. And so there's, that's been added to our environment, and that's going to have a negative effect. But we're not even focused on that because of everything else that's going on. And so what's happening is human beings are collapsing. Human beings are getting more and more broken. I mean, this is, it's becoming more and more evident, more and more psychological issues, health issues, social issues, inability to function. And that's happening over generations. Weaker and weaker human beings. And so when that happens, like that's, human beings being weaker means eventually there's going to be a collapse of the human being as just, human beings collapsing in themselves and their civilization collapsing along with it. And that's what's happening right now. Again, we can see it happening. And so, it becomes, well, do we save the human species, right? And I guess we're all supposed to participate in that. I mean, that's something that I've accepted, that we're supposed to, make a case for the human beings moving forward. So we have to do things personally. And for me, it's the heartfulness meditation because it's made me a better person. So I believe that if other people had the same experience or a similar experience to what I had, in terms of it making me a better person, becoming a better person, with the central part of that is it changes a person's capacity to love, and it changes your heart in a positive way. I mean, those of us who have had a good experience, had a positive experience with the heartfulness meditation, we become more loving people. I'm a more loving person than I was when I started. And I guess that's probably the best thing you could say about anything, any system, that it makes you a more loving person. Anything that makes you a more loving person, what's better than that, right? And so can that amount of, positive heart movement and growth and our capacity to love developing, can that be enough to, save the human race? I mean, this is what the heartfulness system is here for, to help people evolve into becoming more loving people and more compassionate and selfless and all the things that go with this. Love is, when you become more loving, then that evolves into better character qualities, empathy and compassion and sensitivity and, more service-oriented and just a better person. And so bringing out the best in the human species, and this is why the heartfulness system exists, to make a case for human beings being able to evolve and raise up to a higher level of vibration and orientation to the world. And so it's hard to really assess whether it'll be successful or not. Like, I believe it will be successful, but that's based in things that have yet to happen. Like, that's based in whether human beings can rise up to a higher level of ability, a higher level of being, whether they choose to do that, because there's also the choice. Each person has to choose to do that. And so we it hasn't happened yet, at least in terms of our linear time, our understanding of time in a linear way, from point A to point B, instead of a cyclical way. So at least in terms of, where we are right now, it hasn't happened yet, right? It's happened for some people, and there's a growing movement, but will it happen sufficiently enough to save the human race? Because right now, there's a potential that the human race will go extinct and take the world down with them. And we'll see, I mean, I might not see it, like at least in this, as Paul Romano, but I'll see some of it, and so will you. And hopefully we see a lot more positive things in the future in terms of what human beings are doing and developing, because some of this stuff's happening. People are evolving, but it hasn't surfaced yet. We haven't seen it manifest into them as a person and even ourselves. Like the people who do the heartfulness system, there's spiritual evolution that's happening that hasn't translated into behaviors and a difference that you could see on a material level in the person. Maybe subtle changes, but not enough that you would see the substantial growth. Even Master Charji, the third master of the system, he gave a message to the medium who writes The Whispers of the Brighter World, and he was blown away when after he transitioned from physical life into the spirit world at what the heartfulness system was. And he was the master of the system. Like, he had no idea like its importance and what it was doing, and he didn't understand the evolution that he was going through and what Babaji had become. And he knew Babaji as a human being, but he didn't understand his spiritual essence and what he had evolved into becoming. And so his message was like, he was stunned in terms of whatever that means on a spiritual level. After he died, right, he was blown away by what he couldn't see when he was in his physical body. So there's some of that as well. But there are changes there's a positive movement to balance out the negative movement, and we'll see what happens, right? Like that's, a lot of this is us doing our small part and things happening, events happening, and, opportunities being opened up and changes happening in the world and motivational things that happen that motivate human beings on a spiritual level that haven't happened yet. And hopefully those things, when they come to pass, human beings will choose to evolve. But the X factor is always that human beings' ability to choose to do the right thing and to evolve to a higher level. And right now, that's not happening, at least on a conscious level, for most people. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.